Hey guys, welcome back to PoliMetrics. Today we're going to talk about something that explains more about how your city government makes decisions than almost anything else: policy diffusion. That's the process through which policy ideas spread from one government to another. When one city bans cannabis, cities next door tend to follow. Or when a county signs a new immigration agreement because its neighbors just did. That's diffusion at work. It's one of those invisible forces that quietly shapes life in every community. By the end of this episode, you'll understand the four major mechanisms that drive diffusion. Number 1, imitation. 2, learning. 3, coercion. And 4, competition. We'll also look at how each one of these mechanisms show up in the real world. All right, so let's start with the basic question. Why do cities copy one another in the first place? At the local level, governments face a lot of the same problems: housing costs, traffic, revenue shortages, and they all tend to look to each other for solutions. Often, the safest move politically is to do what your peers are doing. Take California, for example. When the state legalized recreational marijuana in 2016, you might expect that to open the door for legal businesses everywhere. But by 2025, more than half of California cities had banned cannabis businesses anyway. If you look at a map, the bans form clusters. Cities that banned tend to be near each other or inside the same regional professional networks. It's not coincidence. It's the first and most common mechanism of diffusion: imitation. Imitation happens when policymakers borrow ideas simply because other governments already have done it. It's the safe bet logic. If the city next door did it and didn't get sued, maybe we should too. In California, city councils watched what others were doing. They saw bans pass quietly without political backlash. They borrowed ordinance language almost word for word at times. They moved within the same 6-month windows. It's imitation. It's not about evidence or ideology. It's about risk reduction. Researchers found this across all kinds of local policy: plastic bag bans in Colorado, minimum wage increases in California, even parking regulations in large metro areas. Once one jurisdiction moves, the neighbors follow. It's policy making, but by social proof. But imitation isn't the only way policy spread. Sometimes governments don't just copy, they actually learn. Learning is more thoughtful. It happens when governments watch what others do, evaluate outcomes, and then adapt the policy to their own conditions. You can see this dynamic in Washington state's cannabis regulations. After statewide legalization, researchers collected ordinances from 142 Washington cities. They found variation everywhere: zoning, licensing, business hours, but not random variation. Cities learned from each other's successes and mistakes. One city allowed dispensaries near schools and saw backlash. Nearby cities adjusted their zoning to avoid it. Another city found strict hours reduced complaints. Others adopted the same rule. That looks a lot like learning. Policies evolving through observation and feedback. In my dissertation research on California cities, I found something similar. Cities didn't just copy their geographic neighbors. They were strongly influenced by other municipalities in their League of California Cities division. These regional networks meet regularly, share drafts, and talk through what's working and what's not. So when one city manager reports that a certain ordinance passed smoothly, peers in that professional circle often follow. Learning connects local governments into what amounts to an informal school of policy. But sometimes copying and learning aren't voluntary at all. Sometimes the pressure comes from above, and that's where coercion enters the picture. In 2025, something big happened in the world of immigration enforcement. Under Section 287G of the Immigration and Nationality Act, Local law enforcement agencies can partner with ICE to help enforce immigration law. At the start of that year, there were about 135 of these partnerships nationwide. By September, there were more than 1,000. That's nearly an 8-fold increase in 9 months, which is one of the fastest expansions of a federal local program in modern history. Now, diffusion theory would predict imitation and learning here too, and they were present. Counties observed peers signing agreements, saw positive coverage, and followed suit. But in this case, coercion played a pretty big role as well. Here's how. First, state mandates. Florida passed a law in 2022 requiring any jail facility to participate in 287G. By 2025, that single law had created over 325 local agreements. Texas followed with similar proposals, and Virginia's governor issued an executive order encouraging compliance. Number 2, federal pressure. The Trump administration used executive orders and public rhetoric to reward participating jurisdictions and shame those that resisted. Federal officials highlighted compliant counties in press releases and criticized dissenting mayors by name. And number 3, financial incentives. In September and October of 2025, the federal government began announcing and actually reimbursing officer salaries, providing equipment, funds, and even offering performance bonuses for jurisdictions that participated in the program. When a local official faces state mandates, federal money, and public political pressure all at once, choice becomes mostly theoretical. That's policy diffusion through coercion, where alignment is created not by imitation or learning, but by power and incentives. A fourth mechanism that researchers identify is competition. This happens when governments adopt policies to avoid losing out. For example, competing for businesses, residents, or federal grants. Competition can look similar to imitation, but the motivation is defensive rather than social. A city might raise its minimum wage because neighboring jurisdictions did, and it doesn't want workers to commute elsewhere. Or it might streamline permitting rules because a rival city's faster process is attracting investment. You could even see hints of this in the 287G expansion. When neighboring sheriffs began touting new federal funding and media praise, others felt pressure to join so they wouldn't appear soft on crime or lose out on new federal funding. Competition is often the accelerant in diffusion, the we can't be left behind impulse. In reality, all 4 mechanisms can operate at once. The 2025 287G surge is a textbook case. For imitation, counties saw peers adopt and followed the pattern. With learning, later adopters adjusted implementation details after watching early experiences. For coercion, state mandates and federal funding created direct pressure. And with competition, local officials didn't want to be the only county in their region not participating. When those forces align, social proof, evidence, pressure, and competition, diffusion becomes almost unstoppable. And that's exactly what happened. Within months, entire regions moved in clusters, creating new norms faster than public debate could catch up with. To understand what actually predicts adoption, though, I built a Cox proportional hazards model using county-level data from January through September 2025. The model tracked 440 adoptions across more than 100,000 county weeks. Findings lined up pretty neatly with diffusion theory that we've talked about. First, the neighbor effect, the single strongest predictor in my study. If a bordering county adopted, the odds of adoption jumped up 31%. State momentum was important too. Each additional adopter in the same state increased the likelihood slightly but consistently. Fiscal pressure with capacity to make the changes was also an important factor. Counties with higher debt loads, long-term fiscal pressure, were more likely to adopt. but counties in immediate deficit crises were not. Demographics played a role here as well. Larger, more established counties with higher home ownership rates leaned toward adoption. Counties with larger Hispanic populations and more college graduates were less likely. In short, diffusion favored counties that had both reasons and capacity to join, those that felt pressure but also had the administrative infrastructure to handle it. That's an important nuance. Diffusion isn't just contagious, it can also be selective. So why does any of this matter? Because it reveals that local democracy often operates through networks of imitation and pressure rather than direct public deliberation. Your city might not be making decisions purely based on what residents want. It might be acting to stay aligned with professional peers, state mandates, or regional expectations. That doesn't mean local government is broken. It means we have to understand the ecosystem it lives in. Knowing how diffusion works gives citizens leverage. If you're an advocate, target influential jurisdictions, the ones others tend to copy. If you're skeptical of a policy, build coalitions in those same professional networks to slow the cascade. And always ask, what city or county did this idea come from? What evidence suggests it worked there? Are we similar enough for the same policy to work here? Diffusion isn't inherently good or bad. It's just one of the ways democracies learn. It's how innovation spreads. An influential thinker in public policy once said that states are laboratories of democracy. With nearly 39,000 local governments, we're really running thousands of experiments every year, sometimes repeating mistakes, but sometimes refining successes. The challenge is just to make sure imitation and coercion don't outrun learning and evaluation. When cities copy wisely, adapting based on evidence, diffusion becomes a learning engine. When they copy blindly, chasing trends or political cover, it becomes a shortcut to mediocrity. So here's the takeaway. Most of the change that shapes your daily life doesn't flow from the top down or bottom up. It flows sideways. City councils and county boards are constantly watching each other, learning, copying, competing, and sometimes bowing to outside pressure. Understanding policy diffusion helps explain why your community suddenly adopts a new rule that sometimes feels like it came out of nowhere. But the thing is, it probably did come from somewhere else. And it helps us to see governance not as a series of isolated decisions, but as a living network, one that connects every city hall in America in ways most people never see. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode on policy diffusion. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode. Thanks for listening.